You're telling me a kid just handed over every dollar he's got for scrap?
The man behind the counter didn't answer. He was still looking at the money on the desk. $255 in tens and fives and one soft 20, folded so many times it had gone furry at the crease. Out back, behind a chain-link fence nobody had bothered locking in years, 12 snowplow blades leaned in a rough line. Rust, the color of dried blood. County yellow chipped down to bare steel along the cutting edges. Cracked rubber deflectors hanging off the curve like peeling skin. Bolt holes stripped. Road salt had eaten white veins into the metal. Weeds grew up through the gaps between them. 16-year-old Cassius Bledsoe stood in front of them the way most people stand in front of a hand of cards. I'll take all 12. If you like stories about people the world wrote off too early, hit subscribe and stay with this one. It's worth the whole way through. Denny Osgood counted the money a second time. Not because he thought it was short, because he didn't believe what he was counting. The county road shop in Dunmore, Nebraska kept its surplus out back. Old culvert pipe, a grater wing with a cracked casting, and 12 plow blades that had come off the trucks the spring the county re-equipped and had been leaning against that fence ever since. Osgood pushed the stack of bills back across the desk, halfway. Just far enough that the boy could take it if he wanted to. "Son, I've been trying to give these away since March." He scratched behind his ear and glanced out the window toward the fence line, where the wind was moving the tall weeds in slow waves. 2 scrap outfits wouldn't even burn the diesel to come get 'em. That ought to tell you something. $255 was 2 summers of detasseling corn in July heat that came off the rows like it had a grudge. A bicycle bought at a farm sale and resold in April. Weekend hours cleaning another man's calving pens. 14 months in a Christmas cookie tin under a bed, and not $1 of it ever spent on anything. The boy didn't touch the money. He walked back outside instead. He put his palm flat against the back of the nearest blade. Not the edge, not the bolt holes, not the cracked rubber. The back. The long, curved sweep of steel where the moldboard rolled over on itself. And he pushed. Nothing moved. Not a flex, not a give, not a groan. He stepped to the second blade and did it again, then the third. He never once looked at the cutting edges. Everybody else looked at nothing else. He was looking at the curve. The shop door banged. A man came out of the bay with a hydraulic fitting in one hand and stopped cold at the sight of a forklift swinging the 4th blade up onto a borrowed stock trailer, the springs already sitting low. Kurt Sedlacek ran 240 head 3 places west, on open prairie that ran flat to the horizon in every direction. Good grass, good fences, a gravel lane that drifted shut at least twice every winter, and a case loader he was proud of in a way he'd never have admitted out loud. "Denny, tell me you did not just take that boy's money." He said it loud enough to carry. That was the point of saying it. 40 of those dollars had come out of Kurt Sedlacek's own checkbook 2 summers back for cleaning his calving pens. He didn't remember writing it. There was no particular reason he should have. Cass ran the chain through the trailer ring, hauled it tight, and checked the tension with a boot before he answered. He didn't turn around. "They're not going back on a truck, sir." He pulled the slack out of the second chain and set the binder. "That's not what I need them for." He'd repeat some version of that line for the next 4 months to men who asked without wanting an answer. It stopped being funny in January. The trailer came up the lane at 15 miles an hour because it wouldn't do any better loaded, and by the time it swung around behind the barn, Harlan Bledsoe was already coming out of the machine shed with his cane. He was 67. He'd been walking with that cane for 2 winters, and he still held it like it was somebody else's. He went around the trailer once without saying anything, which was worse than shouting. It took him 9 seconds to find the crack running 6 inches out of a bolt hole in the 3rd blade, and he tapped the cane against it. Cracked, bent, bolt holes chewed right out. He moved down the line, knocking the cane tip against the steel, counting them off, 1 hollow ring at a time. "You handed a man $255 for 12 pieces of a truck that doesn't exist anymore." Cass let him finish. His grandfather couldn't be interrupted, only outlasted. Then he laid his hand flat on the curved back of the blade, the same way he had at the shop. The county didn't pull these because the steel gave out. He leaned his weight into it. The blade didn't move a quarter inch. They pulled them because the brackets did. This part never wore out. Nobody ever asked it to. He mentioned, almost in passing, that he'd walked Kurt Sedlacek's road cut back in October. Same 3-foot drop, same 60 yards, same open northwest ground. He told him to mind his own. It was the kind of thing a man says and forgets inside a minute. Denise Bledsoe got home a little after 9, still in her work clothes. She ran a line at a beef processing plant 40 minutes east. The winter before, the county road had closed while she was on shift, and she had slept 2 nights on the break room floor, 40 minutes from her own son, listening to other people's alarms go off. She came in, saw her father-in-law's face, saw the boy sitting very straight at the kitchen table with his hands flat on the wood, and understood most of it before anyone said a word. She didn't yell. She did something worse. She pulled out a chair, sat down without taking off her coat, and asked one question. "Cassius, look at me." He looked up. "Do you know this'll work, or do you just want it to?" The boy could have lied. It would have been easy, and it would have been the smart play, and everything after would have meant less. "I think it might." He looked down at the table, at his own hands. "That's all I've got, Mama. I think it might." Denise nodded once. She stood up, hung her coat on the hook, and went to bed. She never said no. She never said yes, either. Cass thought that was the end of it. He was clearing his plate when he realized the old man hadn't left the kitchen. Harlan was standing by the counter with both hands on the cane, and his jaw was working. "You think I don't know what that road did?" The knuckles on the cane went white. "I'm the reason this family found out. I'm not going to be the reason you're broke on top of it." There was nothing to say back to that, so the boy didn't try. Harlan pushed off the counter and made for the hallway. He stopped in the doorway just long enough to deliver the verdict he'd been building all evening. 12 lawn ornaments. Saturday morning came up gray and still, which out there usually means the wind is only resting. Cass got his grandfather into the side-by-side without offering to help. Offering was a good way to end the trip before it started, and drove east down the lane. The lane ran 3/4 of a mile from the county road to the house, straight west across open pasture. No trees, no windbreak for the last half mile. 400 yards out, the ground sagged toward a dry creek bed and the lane dropped with it. A shallow road cut, 3 feet deep, 60 yards end to end. He stopped at the east lip and killed the engine. Look at the posts on the north side. He got out and left the door open. Then look at the south. Harlan looked. On the north side of the lane, the fence posts were worn smooth. Bare, gray wood polished clean from the ground up to about 3 feet, every one of them, like somebody had gone down the line with a sander and quit at the same height each time. Below that line, old grass and dirt were packed hard against the base of each post in a wedge you could have kicked and not broken. On the south side, 20 feet away, the posts were clean, weathered, but ordinary. The old man stood there a long time, long enough that his hands went red on the cane. "Wind's been sanding these posts since before your mother was born." He looked down the line, counting without meaning to. Same 3 feet. Every damn one of them. Those posts had been standing there the boy's whole life. Harlan had driven past them 4,000 times. So had the mail carrier, and the county grader, and every man who'd ever cursed that cut with a shovel in his hands. Cass didn't know one thing about wind that they didn't. He'd just never stopped looking at something they'd all quit looking at years ago. 2 winters back, an ambulance had come up this lane at 4 in the morning with Harlan Bledsoe strapped in the back of it. It got as far as the east end of this cut and stopped. Its lights kept turning for an hour and 40 minutes against a wall of snow 3 feet high and 60 yards long, while 2 paramedics dug with hand shovels because there was nothing else to do. Cass had stood at the top of the cut the whole time, holding a flashlight nobody needed. Neither of them looked at that spot now. Harlan kept his eyes on the north fence line and didn't turn his head once. Cass walked to the north edge of the lane and lifted his chin at 600 yards of open grass running away northwest. No trees, no buildings, no ridge. The snow that buries this road doesn't fall here, Grandpa. The wind picked at the hem of his coat and dropped it. It falls out there, miles of it. Wind picks it up and carries it south till it finds somewhere slow enough to set it down. This cuts the first slow place in 2 miles. Harlan chewed on that. Then he asked the question every single person watching would have asked. So you're building a snow fence? And this was the part the boy had been waiting 3 weeks to say out loud to somebody who might hear it. A snow fence stands straight up. He scuffed a line into the frozen ground with the toe of his boot, then made a second mark a good stride behind it. It catches snow on the backside and builds you a wall 30 feet behind it. And by February, that wall's on your road anyway. You didn't stop the drift. You just moved it 30 feet and made it harder. He crouched and drew the curve with his finger, a shallow hook opening into the wind. I don't want a wall. I want the bottom layer of wind to lift, just a little, just long enough that the heavy stuff drops early and spreads out flat instead of piling into a ridge. Harlan looked at the marks in the dirt, then back at the sanded fence posts. He said it was the dumbest thing he'd ever heard a Bledsoe say out loud. But he didn't walk back to the house. He got in the side-by-side and waited. That was the whole concession. He had 12 blades, an idea he couldn't prove, and not $1 left to be wrong with. Wendell Pike lived 4 miles north, in the house he'd kept when he sold the tillable ground off. He was 72. He'd run a road grader for the county for 38 winters, and he welded on the side for anybody who asked nicely and paid in cash or beef. Cass rode a bicycle out there, 4 miles into a north wind on a 10-speed with a bent rim because there was no gas money in the house that wasn't already spoken for. Pike walked the row without hurrying. He kicked the corners. He laid his palm flat on each curved face and leaned into it, feeling for give. He looked down the bolt holes and rapped his knuckles on the steel and listened to what came back. 20 minutes. He didn't say a word the whole time. 8 of these I'd trust standing up in a wind. He moved down and towed the next 2. 2 more if you brace 'em twice and don't get greedy about where you put 'em. He stopped at the last pair, the cracked one, and the one worn so thin along the top curl you could see daylight in the pitting. These last 2 are just scrap. He nudged the cracked one with his boot and watched it rock. But scrap's still steel. Then Cass asked the question he'd been dreading, what the rest of it would cost. The braces, the posts, the concrete. He already knew what he had to spend on it, which was nothing. Pike squatted and flipped one of the ruined blades onto its face, then wrapped his knuckles on the heavy frame where it used to bolt to the truck. That bracket's the only flat steel on the whole rig, 1/2-inch plate. There's your foot plates, all 10 of them. He stood up, knees popping. Rest of it gets cut into gussets. Posts I've got, 20 years of pipe behind that shop nobody's coming for. Auger's mine. Then he turned around, and the temperature of the conversation changed. Son, I ran a blade for 38 winters. He held up one hand, then closed it into a fist and let it drop. You know how many times I moved a drift before it formed? Not once. Not one single time in 38 years. We plowed it open. The wind filled it back in, and we plowed it again. That's the job. That's the whole job, start to finish. The boy didn't step back, and he didn't raise his voice. Then how many times did you plow the same cut, sir? Pike didn't answer. He turned and looked out the shop window, and he stayed turned around longer than the question needed. He agreed to help on a Tuesday, not because he believed the kid. He didn't. Because a 16-year-old had just asked him something he'd never thought to ask himself in 38 years. You pay me in labor. Yours. He pointed the wrench at him. Every hole we dig, you're standing in it. It took 5 days, and none of it looked like anything. Day 1 was dragging. They ran a chain off the drawbar of the old Massey and hauled the blades out one at a time, 150 yards north of the road cut. The top 2 inches of ground had already frozen, and the blades tore long brown scars through the grass on the way out. Cass laid out the spacing by pacing it, heel to toe, counting under his breath. Pike watched him do the whole line, then handed him a tape measure and told him to do it again. Pace counting is how a man builds something that falls over in March. The spacing was off by 14 inches at the west end. Day 2 was fire. Pike cut the 2 dead blades apart with a torch, brackets sheared off and squared into 10 half-inch footplates, curved sections carved down into triangles for gussets. Cass held the pieces while the old man ran bead after bead. The welding hood was too big for his head and kept dropping every time he nodded. By dark, 10 blades had angle iron spines welded down their backs and heavy plates at their feet. Midway through the afternoon, a pickup came out the pasture 2-track and stopped. Harlan got out, walked as far as the hood, and threw a receipt onto the warm metal. 6 bags of Portland cement. "I'm not buying into your idea." He got back in, shut the door, and then rolled the window down again because he wasn't finished. "I'm buying concrete so this thing doesn't blow over onto somebody's cow and cost this family a lawsuit on top of everything else." He drove off without looking back. Cass stood there and read that receipt for a lot longer than a receipt takes to read. Day 3 was holes, 10 of them 3 feet deep, in ground frozen down 8 inches over clay. On hole 6, the auger sheared a tooth on a rock, and Cass finished that one on his knees with a post hole digger and a bar, while Pike stood at the top and said nothing helpful. Every hole, he was standing in it. That had been the deal. Day 4 was the argument. They set the pipe and started laying out the line, and there were 3 ways to do it, 2 of which Cass had already thrown out. A straight line, panels edge to edge, that was a solid face, and a solid face just packed the snow hard against its own back. A wall with extra steps. A straight line with gaps was better. Still not right. What went in the ground was staggered. Every blade set a little ahead or behind its neighbor so it overlapped the wind shadow of the next one. Curved faces aimed northwest, each panel canted a few degrees off square, 8 feet of open air between them. The angles came from hayseed. Cass would grab a handful of chaff out of the back of the feed pickup, throw it into the wind at each stake, and watch where it went. Then he'd get down with his cheek almost in the grass and watch it again from ground level, tracking the low stuff, the seed that never lifted, the seed that skated along the tops of the grass and kept going. Then he'd shift the panel a few degrees and do it over. Pike watched him do that 3 times before he said anything. "I've seen engineers out of Lincoln bill this county $11,000, he shook his head. "And not one of them ever got down and looked at the bottom 4 inches of the wind." The gaps were the fight. "You're leaving 8 feet of open air between every panel." Pike gestured down the whole line with the back of his hand, disgusted. "That's 8 feet of wind that nothing stops. You've built a fence that's half not there." Cass didn't argue. He crouched and drew 2 shapes in the skiff of snow with his finger. "That's 8 feet of wind that keeps the pile spread out." He tapped the first shape, a tall, narrow hump. "Solid face gives you this. 3 feet tall, 20 wide, packs hard as a countertop, and every year it creeps closer to the road until one winter it is the road." He tapped the second, a long, low smear. "I want this. A foot tall, an acre wide, something a pickup drives over the shoulder of and never notices. I want it boring." Pike looked at the 2 drawings in the snow for a while. "Boring. All right." Day 5 was concrete and waiting on it, and then nothing. When they finished, 8 rusted steel fins stood 4 feet above the grass in the middle of a cow pasture, braced, plated, bolted, curved faces aimed at 600 yards of empty ground. 8 standing, 2 spares under a tarp against the barn in case. 2 cut up and welded into the backs of the other 8. 12 blades bought, 12 blades used. From the county road half a mile off, they looked like exactly what everybody said they were. In a county that size, nothing has to get reported. It circulates. Kurt Sedlacek said it at the co-op counter on a Thursday morning with 6 men in earshot. Bledsoe kids stuck a junkyard in a pasture and called it engineering. Some of them laughed. The ones who didn't were mostly old enough to have fought that road cut themselves. Denny Osgood was behind the counter running a feed ticket, and he didn't look up. He paid $2.55. The room went quiet for about 2 seconds while everybody did the math on what $2.55 means to a 16-year-old. Then they laughed harder. Somebody said ornaments, and it caught. And by the end of the week, you didn't need the rest of the sentence. Denise heard it at the plant secondhand and never once repeated it at home. Cass came in for a spool of fence wire that same week while the laughing was still going, paid, said thank you, and walked out. He'd figured out early that answering people just gives them a second thing to say. The first real snow came in the middle of December, 4 inches overnight with a steady northwest wind behind it. Not a blizzard, not anything anybody would remember. Just a plain snow with enough wind to move what had already fallen. Cass was up at 10 to 5. He took a flashlight and walked the road cut on foot in the dark, east lip to west, then back, then a third time, slower. The hard-packed ridge that normally formed across the deepest part of that cut, the one that had stopped an ambulance, was there. It was thin. And 180 yards northwest, out in the grass, 30 yards downwind of the blade line, the flashlight beam found a long, low hump of snow lying in the pasture. Not a drift, not a ridge. A hump, spread wide and shallow, sitting exactly where nobody had ever seen snow choose to sit before. He stood out there in 20-degree air for 11 minutes until his hands quit working the flashlight switch right. The lane still needed a pass with the tractor blade. It always would. But it needed one. 4 inches with that wind normally meant 2 hard passes, packed so tight between them that the second one was a fight. 1 pass. Cass ran it himself before the school bus came. Harlan stood at the kitchen window with his coffee while the boy came in and stamped the snow off in the entry, and he watched the lane for most of breakfast without a word. 1 pass. Cass hung his coat on the hook and didn't make it a bigger thing than it was. 1 pass. The old man set his mug down on the counter harder than he needed to. Don't go getting proud on me, boy. That was 4 inches in a breeze. Anybody can hold a road together in 4 inches in a breeze. And this is where a different kid takes the win. I know. Cass looked out the window over the sink, where the blade line sat as 8 small dark marks in a white field. It worked once. He rinsed his cup and set it in the rack. We don't know anything real until the wind means it. 3 days later, he found the failure. He walked the line every other morning by then, out of something between diligence and superstition. And on the Thursday, he came up on panel number 4 and stopped 20 feet short of it. It was leaning, not much, maybe 15 degrees off plumb, canted back away from the wind. The post hadn't moved. The concrete hadn't heaved. The angle iron spine welded down the back of it had bent. That was the small problem. The big one took another 40 minutes, and he found it by walking. He hiked 200 yards straight upwind of the west end, turned around, and walked back with his eyes on the ground. Then he did it again from a different angle. Out where the pasture necked down between the head of the road cut and the bank of the dry creek, the wind was getting squeezed, running faster through that pinch than anywhere else along the line. And 8 feet of gap, which was exactly right in the open, was too much there. The snow was going straight through it, unbothered, and reforming in a small, hard finger 50 yards downwind, pointed at the road cut like it was aiming. He sat down on the frozen bank with his back to the wind and drew the whole line on the back of a feed receipt, and stayed there until his fingers wouldn't close. Nobody told him. Nobody was out there. He found it because he went looking, and he went looking because he'd already stopped assuming he was right. He called Pike at 7 that evening. Number 4's leaning, brace bent, posts fine. He read off the second half of it from the receipt in his hand. And the west end's leaking. Wind necks down between the cut and the creek bank and pushes right through the gap. And this is the moment the whole thing turned over. Pike didn't tell him what to do. All right, what do you want to do about it? Double the brace on 4. Plate it both sides, not just the spine. And I want the 2 spares up. Tighten the last 3 gaps at the west end down to 6 feet. I don't know why I bought all 12. I couldn't have told you at the time. He turned the receipt over and looked at his own drawing. I just knew I didn't want to have to go back. On the other end of the line, in a shop 4 miles north, an old man looked out his window at nothing. Turns out that was the smartest thing you did all fall. They set the last 2 panels on a Saturday night in 12-degree air. The ground was frozen too hard for the auger, so they burned scrap pallet down on each spot and thawed the crust that way, 1 hole at a time. They finished a little after 11. Cass couldn't feel 3 fingers. Pike's back had quit around 9:30, and neither of them mentioned it. 10 blades standing now. The tarp against the barn was empty. The forecast turned in the 2nd week of January. A deep low building over Colorado, dragging Arctic air down out of Saskatchewan behind it. By Tuesday, the Weather Service had a blizzard warning up for the whole western half of the state. 12 to 18 inches, sustained winds 35 miles an hour, gusts over 50. Wind chill below 20 degrees under zero. Travel not recommended for 36 to 48 hours. They started preparing 2 days out because that's what you do. The bred cows came in closer to the lots. Every hay ring got filled. The feed truck ran twice to stock the bunks. Cass bled the generator's fuel line and ran it 15 minutes under load. Checked the tank heaters, topped off the diesel barrel. Denise called off her Friday shift and took the unpaid day. She didn't explain why to anybody at the plant. She had no intention of sleeping on that break room floor a second time. Wednesday afternoon it was 12 degrees, and the wind was already up out of the northwest, the kind that finds the gap between your collar and your hat and stays there. Cass walked the blade line alone. 10 panels. He kicked the ice loose from the base of every post and cleared it away with his boot. He pulled frozen clumps of grass and tumbleweed out of every gap, one at a time, barehanded, because you can't do it in gloves. He put both hands on each brace and threw all 145 pounds of himself against it, and then did it again from the other side. 10 panels, 70 minutes. He came in with his ears white at the tips and his hands not working right, and nobody asked. Denise watched the whole thing from the kitchen window, holding a dish towel she'd stopped using 20 minutes earlier. Harlan came and stood beside her. Around the 6th panel, when the boy went down on one knee to dig ice out from under a footplate, the old man reached over and took his coat off the hook. He held it for a while. Then he put it back and let the boy finish it himself. The last thing Cass did before he came in was stand at the west end of the line with his hand flat on the curved face of panel 11, where the gaps ran 6 feet instead of 8. The steel was so cold it burned through the glove. Come on. He wasn't talking to anybody. There wasn't anybody out there. Just lift it, just a little. It came in Thursday evening and it came in fast. By 9 o'clock, the yard light had a halo around it. By 10, the halo was gone, and so was the yard light. By midnight, the wind was steady out of the northwest at 40 miles an hour, and the snow wasn't falling anymore in any sense of the word. It was traveling, sideways, in ropes. The house shook. Not dramatically, just a low, continuous shudder in the window frames that you stop hearing after 2 hours and then hear again all at once at 3 in the morning. Cass did not sleep. He sat in the upstairs window at the north end of the hall, in a chair he'd carried up from the kitchen, wrapped in a quilt, looking out at a direction instead of at anything. There was nothing to see. 150 yards out, 10 panels of 40-year-old steel were either working or they weren't, and he wouldn't know which for another day and a half, and there was nothing he could do about any of it. At 3 in the morning, the stairs started. It took Harlan Bledsoe about a minute and a half to climb 14 steps with a cane and a bad chest. Every one of them was audible over the wind. He came down the hall, set a cup of coffee on the windowsill beside the boy, and stood there for a moment with one hand on the door frame, breathing harder than he wanted anybody to notice. Then he went back down. He didn't say it was going to work. He didn't say it wasn't. He climbed 14 stairs at 3 in the morning so the boy wouldn't be sitting up there by himself. It blew for 19 hours. When the wind finally broke on Saturday morning, Cass opened the porch door onto a world that had been rearranged. Snow sculpted hard against every surface that faced northwest. A drift to the eaves on the north side of the machine shed. Hay rings buried halfway up their sides. The county road out east simply gone, not covered, gone, indistinguishable from the ditch and the field beyond it. The damage came in over 3 days, and the pattern was never really about the snowfall. It was about the wind afterward. Snow that had already landed kept moving, kept finding the same low spots and road cuts it had found every winter since anybody started keeping track. You could open a road at 9 in the morning and lose it by 4 to a breeze that wasn't worth mentioning on the radio. Kurt Sedlacek's road cut was the same depth as the Bledsoes, same 60 yards, same open northwest exposure. The boy had walked it in October and said so out loud in a farmyard and been waved off. It drifted in 4 feet deep, wall to wall. He fired the case up at first light Saturday and punched through it in an hour and a half, and it was good work, and he was entitled to be pleased with it. By 3 that afternoon, the wind had come back up, 15 miles an hour. Nothing. The cut was filling. He cleared it again before dark. Sunday morning, it was shut. He cleared it Sunday. Monday afternoon, fighting the same 60 yards for the 4th time, the bucket caught a frozen fence post buried somewhere under the pack, and the hydraulic line let go and put 6 quarts of fluid across the snow in a stripe you could see from the county road. He spent Tuesday in the shed with a torch and a fitting kit while the lane filled in behind him. The county was worse off than any one man. 2 graders broke down. One operator ran 20 straight hours before a supervisor pulled him out of the seat and drove him home. By Sunday afternoon, half the rural routes were still shut, and the ones they'd opened were rebuilding behind the blade. Greg. And it stopped being about equipment somewhere in there. The Ledbetter place south of Dunmore was shut in 3 full days. A neighbor who tried to reach them Saturday evening got his own loader stuck a mile short and walked out. They hand-carried hay from the stack to the cattle lots until Monday. The veterinarian in Dunmore couldn't get to 2 calving operations until Monday. One of them lost a first calf heifer that needed help and didn't get it. And the Bledsoe lane was not clean. Let's be honest about it, because the story is worse if it isn't. There was snow on that lane. There was ice under the snow. The road cut had a drift in it, and it took a hard pass with the tractor Saturday afternoon to open it, and Cass had to back off and come at it twice. The drift was 2 feet deep, not 4. And when the wind came back up Saturday night, the same wind off the same quarter at the same speed that was refilling every cut in the county, that drift did not rebuild. 150 yards north of the road cut, behind 10 rusted plow blades that a county couldn't give away, a long, low hump of snow lay across nearly an acre of grass. 3 feet at its deepest point, spread so wide and so gradual that you could have driven a pickup over the shoulder of it and only known by the sound. The wind that crossed that line still carried snow. It just carried less of it. And what got through came in loose instead of packed. Sunday afternoon, a feed truck out of the Dunmore Co-op turned off the highway. Alton Reese had been driving that route 11 years. He'd already turned around twice that morning, once at a section corner where the drift came over the hood line, and once at a lane he'd gotten 100 yards down before he understood he was about to be a problem instead of a delivery. He came up the Bledsoe lane in 4-wheel drive at 8 miles an hour, riding the crown, feeling for the ice underneath. And he made it. Messages. I've turned around 3 times since Friday. He swung down out of the cab and knocked the snow off his pant legs against the running board, looking around the yard like he expected to find something. 3. This is the only farm road south of the highway I've gotten down since this thing started. He nodded back at the cut behind him, rough and icy and open. What'd you people do, buy a grader? Harlan Bledsoe was standing by the shop door with both hands on his cane. He turned and looked north. Out past the corrals, past the fence line, out to where 10 dark shapes stood in an acre of white with a long, low ridge of snow lying behind them in the grass. My grandson bought some scrap. Cass was 40 feet away in the lot, unloading mineral tubs off a pallet, and he heard it. He didn't turn around. He set the tub down on the frozen ground, straightened up, and stood there. 3 seconds, maybe 4. Then he picked up the next one. That was the whole reaction. That was all of it. Denise was on the porch with her arms folded across herself. Cass came past her with the empty pallet under one arm and stopped, just long enough to finish something neither of them had finished in November. You asked me if I knew. He wasn't looking at her. He was looking north, past the corrals. I know now. She went inside before anybody could see her face. Wendell Pike got out there Monday, once the county finally opened the road, and he walked the blade line in snow up to his knees, which at 72 is not nothing. He checked every anchor. He checked every brace, including the doubled one on number 4, and he got down and looked under the footplates for heave. 2 panels had ice built up an inch thick across the curved faces. He knocked some of it off with his glove and looked at what was underneath. Not a post had shifted. Not a weld had cracked. Every gap was still open. Then he stood and looked at the hump of snow lying out in the pasture, and then turned and looked past it at the road cut. And he stood that way for a long time without saying anything. You've got maybe 18 inches of loose pack sitting in that cut. Sedlacek's got 4 feet of concrete and it keeps coming back on him. He turned around to face the boy. Same depth, same exposure, same wind. He just hasn't got a thing upwind of it to slow the ground layer. And here's what gets me, son. You didn't know a thing I don't know. He gestured back down the line with the flat of his hand. Everything you used is stuff I've been driving past since 1971. You just kept looking at it. I spent 38 winters fighting these drifts, son. Every year, same cuts, same fight. Plow it open, wind fills it in. Plow it again. He looked at the 10 rusted panels standing in the snow, old county paint, chipped steel, stripped bolt holes, cracked rubber still hanging off 2 of them. You spent $255 figuring out how to move one before it ever formed. And the boy did not have a good answer, because he hadn't prepared one, because he'd never once let himself get far enough ahead to imagine hearing it. It leaked at the west end the first time. Pike looked at him for a second. Course it did. He shook his head and started back toward the truck through his own tracks. Kurt Sedlacek came Wednesday. He didn't call ahead. He parked at the east end of the lane and stood there in the cold with his hands in his pockets, and he looked rough. 5 days of it, 80 gallons of diesel, a blown line, and hay borrowed off a neighbor whose own stack was thin enough that both of them had noticed and neither had mentioned. He looked at the road cut. Rough, icy, rutted, open. Then he looked north at 10 steel fins in a white pasture and the long, low ridge of snow lying behind them, out where it couldn't hurt anybody. How many times do you plow? Cass had come down the lane on the 4-wheeler and shut it off. He answered without any weight on it at all. Twice. Sedlacek pulled a breath in and let it out slow, white in the cold, and didn't say anything for a while. 6. He kicked the toe of his boot at a shelf of ice at the edge of the road. 6 times. And I lost it every single one of them. I've got a $90,000 loader sitting in my shed right now with a blown line and half a bucket of frozen fence posts still in it. You've got $255 of rust standing in a cow pasture, and it's still out there working. He turned the cap around in his hands, and this next part cost him more than the first part. I called them lawn ornaments, down at the co-op. He didn't look up. Said it more than once, said it where it'd get back to you. And here is where a different kid gets his money's worth, where he says, I told you so. Cass looked out at the empty pasture, at 600 yards of ground with nothing on it. A road can get buried by snow that never fell on it, sir. He nodded northwest at the horizon. The wind just brings it from somewhere else. It's been doing it in the same spot for 40 years. You can read it right off the fence posts. I wasn't trying to beat the storm. I just wanted to pick where it set the snow down. Sedlacek nodded slowly. He didn't apologize. Men out there generally don't, and both of them understood he already had a different way. He got in his truck and drove home. 6 weeks went by the way they do. The county replaced a culvert that had heaved in the frost. Sedlacek welded his line and put the case back together. The Bledsoes filed nothing, reported nothing, and told nobody. Their cattle had eaten on schedule. Their road had stayed open. Then the weather radio went off again on a Tuesday morning in late February. 8 to 10 inches. Northwest wind advisory. Blowing and drifting snow likely on rural roads. Cass pulled on his coveralls and went out to the blade line before he went anywhere near the tractor. It didn't take 70 minutes this time. It took 20. He kicked the ice off the base of the posts, worked a frozen wad of grass out of the gap between 3 and 4, put a hand on a couple of braces without really expecting anything, then stood at the west end and traced the ground with his eyes the way you'd trace a road on a map. He wasn't nervous this time. He was just checking. Also, Harlan came out behind him, working the cane against the crusted snow, and it took him a while to get there, and the boy did not offer to help because that was still a good way to end things early. The old man stopped beside him and looked in the same direction he was looking. He didn't ask what he was doing. He didn't ask if it would hold. Which one leaked last time? Cass lifted his chin at the far end of the line. West end. Gaps were too wide where the wind necks down. Took him to 6 feet. He glanced over. Fixed it. Harlan nodded once, slowly, and kept looking northwest. Good. They were still standing there when a pickup came off the county road and up the lane. Kurt Sedlacek got out with a spiral notebook in one hand and stood at the front bumper for a second longer than a man needs to. My cut's got the same problem as yours. Might be worse. Mine's got that bank on the north side. He turned the cap over in his hands. I'm not asking you to build it, I'll build it. I've got the equipment and I've got the help. I'm asking where they'd go. Cass didn't answer right away. He looked at the notebook. He looked at the sky in the northwest, which had gone the flat white it goes about 8 hours ahead of something. Then he reached back through the open door of the pickup and got his coat. I'd have to see your fence posts first. A 50-year-old man with a case loader and 30 years of cattle behind him got into his truck and drove a 16-year-old 3 miles west to go look at his own fence posts. 12 rusted plow blades. $255. Every dollar a 16-year-old boy had in the world folded into a Christmas cookie tin under a bed for 14 months. 2 summers of detasseling. A bicycle bought at a farm sale and sold again in April. Weekend hours in another man's calving pens. 40 of those dollars paid out of the checkbook of a man who would later stand at the end of a lane and call them lawn ornaments. 2 scrap dealers wouldn't burn the diesel to come get them. A county couldn't give them away. A man behind a counter counted the money twice because he didn't believe what he was looking at. 8 of them went into the ground in October. 2 more went up in December, at 11 o'clock at night, over fires built out of broken pallets because the auger wouldn't cut frozen clay. And the last 2 never stood up at all. Those got carved apart with a torch, brackets into footplates, mold boards into gussets, and welded onto the backs of the other 10. 8 plus 2 plus 2. Every blade in that pile ended up holding something up. Nobody wrote any of it down. Drive past on the gravel today, and you'd see 10 pieces of junk standing crooked in a pasture and figure somebody was too lazy to haul them off. The men who ran the machines had 30 and 40 years apiece. They had good equipment. They were not fools. Every winter of their lives, they did the only thing anybody had ever thought to do. Open the road, lose the road, open it again. And they all drove past the same fence posts to get there. Every winter after that one, when the radio started in about a northwest wind, the Bledsoe family didn't go check the tractor first. They looked north. Messenger. If this one stayed with you, leave a comment and let me know. And subscribe because there are a lot more stories like it coming.